There are places in the world where people can disappear without anyone noticing. Not because nobody cares, but because there are simply too many people, too many faces, too many voices, too many lives happening at the same time. Ethan Cole lived in one of those places. The city was enormous. Millions of people lived there, and millions more entered it every day. From the roof of Ethan's apartment building, the skyline looked endless. Towers covered the horizon. Hundreds of windows glowed throughout the night. Roads were constantly filled with headlights, and even after midnight, the streets were alive. The city never truly slept. There were always sirens somewhere. Always a train passing beneath the streets. Always someone shouting from an apartment window. Always a car accelerating through an intersection. Ethan had lived there for almost 30 years. He worked in a small office on the 23rd floor of a glass building downtown. His life wasn't particularly exciting. He went to work, came home, ordered food, watched television, and occasionally met his sister for coffee. He had never believed in ghosts. He didn't believe in demons, spirits, afterlife, or anything else people whispered about when the lights went out. Death was simple. You lived. Then you stopped. That was all. At least, that was what Ethan believed. Until one Tuesday night. It was 2:17 a.m. when he suddenly opened his eyes. He didn't know what had woken him. The room was completely dark. Ethan lay still, staring into the darkness above him. Then he heard breathing. Slow. Deep. Someone was standing in his bedroom. At first, Ethan thought it was an intruder. He tried to move. Nothing. His entire body felt frozen. At the foot of his bed stood a man. Tall. Very thin. He was wearing an old black coat that seemed completely out of place in Ethan's apartment. The man's face was hidden in shadow. Ethan wanted to scream. He couldn't. The figure slowly raised its head. Then it whispered, "Don't let me die alone." Ethan suddenly regained control of his body. He jumped out of bed and turned on the lamp. Nothing. The room was empty. His bedroom door was still closed. The window was locked. Nobody was hiding behind the curtains. Nobody was under the bed. Ethan searched the entire apartment. The front door was locked from the inside. There was no sign that anyone had entered. Eventually, he convinced himself it had been a dream, a nightmare caused by stress. He went back to bed. But exactly 24 hours later, at exactly 2:17 a.m., Ethan woke up again. The man was standing in the same place. Same black coat, same posture, same darkness covering his face. And this time, Ethan heard him clearly. "Don't let me die alone." The light came on. The room was empty again. That was when Ethan stopped sleeping. For the next several nights, he sat awake with every light in the apartment turned on. He kept the television playing. He drank coffee until his hands shook. He checked the locks dozens of times. Nothing happened. And then, 3 days later, he saw the man during the day. Ethan was walking home from work when he noticed someone standing across the street. A tall man, black coat, pale face. Ethan stopped. The man looked directly at him. Ethan felt his stomach drop. It was the same face, the same figure from his bedroom, but there was something different about him now. He looked dead. Not injured, not bloody, just dead. His skin was gray. His lips were almost blue. His eyes were completely black. Ethan crossed the street. The man disappeared behind a passing bus. Ethan hurried after him, but when the bus moved away, there was nobody there. Only a crowd of people walking down the sidewalk. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily. Then he noticed something reflected in a shop window. The man was standing behind him. Ethan turned around. Nothing. He looked back at the glass. The man was gone. That night, Ethan called his sister. He didn't tell her what he'd seen. Instead, he asked her if she had ever experienced anything strange in his apartment. She laughed. "Like what? I don't know. You sound exhausted." "I am. You should sleep." "I can't." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Ethan, maybe you should see someone." He knew what she meant. A doctor, a psychiatrist, someone who could explain why he was seeing things that weren't there. So he went. The doctor asked him several questions. How much had he been sleeping? Was he taking anything? Had he been drinking? Was work stressful? Ethan answered everything honestly. Then the doctor asked, "What exactly are you seeing?" Ethan hesitated. "Dead people." The doctor stopped writing. "Dead people?" "Yes." "What do they look like?" Ethan looked toward the corner of the office. There was a woman standing there. She was wearing a white dress. Her hair covered half of her face. Her neck was bent at an unnatural angle. Ethan slowly pointed toward her. "Like her." The doctor turned. There was nothing there. When he looked back at Ethan, Ethan was crying. The doctor told him to take some time away from work, to sleep, to avoid caffeine, to speak with someone regularly. Ethan agreed, but none of it helped. The dead kept coming. They appeared everywhere. On the subway, in elevators, at restaurants, outside his apartment. Sometimes they looked normal. Sometimes they looked exactly as they had at the moment of their death. A man whose face was burned. A woman covered in blood. A teenager with a broken neck. An old man whose chest was completely crushed. A little girl carrying a red balloon. They never appeared for long. Sometimes Ethan would see one standing in a crowd. He would blink. Gone. Sometimes he would see one sitting across from him on the train. He would look away, look back. Gone. But eventually, Ethan realized something. The ghosts weren't appearing randomly. They were connected to something. It happened one afternoon in a coffee shop. Ethan was sitting near the window when he noticed a young man at the table across the room. The man looked ordinary, maybe 25. Brown jacket, backpack, headphones. He was drinking coffee while scrolling through his phone. Standing directly behind him was an old woman. She looked about 70. Her skin was pale. Her clothes were soaked with water. She stared at Ethan. Then she looked at the young man. Then back at Ethan. Her lips moved. Ethan couldn't hear anything. Suddenly, numbers appeared on the coffee shop window. 11:43 p.m. Ethan blinked. The numbers disappeared. He looked at his phone. 11:43 p.m. He stared at the young man again. The old woman was gone. That evening, Ethan saw the same man on the street. It was 11:38 p.m. Ethan recognized him immediately. The man was crossing a busy intersection. Ethan's heart started pounding. He didn't know why. He simply knew something was wrong. Hey! The man didn't hear him. Ethan ran into the street. Wait! The man turned. At that exact moment, a truck came around the corner. Its brakes screamed. The truck hit the man. The sound was horrible. People screamed. Ethan froze. For several seconds, he couldn't move. Then he ran toward the body. Someone was calling emergency services. Another person was crying. The driver had climbed out of the truck and was staring at the body in horror. Ethan looked down. The young man was dead. And standing beside him was the old woman. She looked at Ethan. Then she smiled. That was when Ethan understood. The number hadn't been random. It had been the time of death. He went home and filled an entire notebook. Names, faces, locations, times, dates. At first, he thought he could prevent them. Then he discovered that the numbers were not always hours away. Sometimes they appeared days before, sometimes weeks. Ethan began following people, warning strangers, calling emergency services, stopping people from getting into cars. He became obsessed. He saved a construction worker from an elevator accident. He convinced a woman to leave a nightclub before an electrical fire started. He stopped a man from boarding a train that later derailed. Every time he saved someone, he felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Because the ghosts became more aggressive, they started appearing closer. At first, they only watched him. Then they began following him. A burned man appeared outside his apartment building. A little girl stood at the end of his hallway. A dead businessman sat in Ethan's favorite chair. One morning, Ethan found wet footprints leading from his front door to his bedroom. The footprints stopped beside his bed. He lived on the 18th floor. There was no explanation. Then one night, Ethan woke up because he couldn't breathe. Something was squeezing his throat. He tried to scream. His feet left the floor. He was being lifted. There was nothing there. Ethan clawed at his neck. His vision began to fade. Then he heard dozens of voices whispering around him. Stop. Stop changing it. Stop warning them. Stop. Ethan collapsed onto the floor. The pressure disappeared. He crawled toward the door. Something had been written across his wall. For words. You are not supposed to. Ethan stared at them for a long time. Then he understood. The ghosts were not simply trying to frighten him. They were trying to stop him. Because every time Ethan prevented a death, something changed. He began seeing connections. A man who should have died in a car accident survived. 3 months later, Ethan saw that man's death time again. Different place. Different circumstances. A woman he had saved from a fire eventually caused an accident that killed 4 people. A child he had rescued from drowning would grow up and become responsible for a disaster that killed hundreds. Ethan started to realize something terrifying. Death was not a list of isolated events. It was a system. Change one death, and something else changed somewhere else. There was no way to save everyone. Ethan became obsessed with trying anyway. He stopped eating properly, stopped answering his phone, stopped going outside unless he had to. His apartment became covered with notes. Thousands of names, thousands of dates, thousands of possible deaths. And then he saw something that made him drop his pen. It happened at noon. Ethan was walking through downtown. There were thousands of people around him. He suddenly noticed numbers above their heads. Not written on walls. Not reflections. Actual numbers floating above them. Every person had one. A date. A time. The moment they would die. Ethan looked around. A businessman. A woman with a stroller. A police officer. A teenager. Millions of people. Millions of endings. Ethan stared upward. Then he saw his sister. He immediately ran toward her. A number appeared above her head. Ethan started crying. At least she had a future. At least he could see one. Then he looked at himself. There was nothing. No date. No time. No number. Nothing. He stepped closer to a store window. Still nothing. He looked around. Every person had a death time. Except him. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment. At exactly 2:17 a.m., someone knocked on his door. 3 times. Knock. 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 Ethan didn't move. The knocking came again. He slowly approached the door. He looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Then a voice whispered from the other side. You don't have a death time. Ethan stepped backward. The voice continued. Because you are not supposed to die. Ethan opened the door. The black-coated man was standing there. For the first time, Ethan saw his face clearly. It was his own face. Older, burned, rotting, dead. Ethan couldn't breathe. The creature smiled. You kept looking. What are you? The thing tilted its head. You. No. Not yet. Ethan backed away. What do you want? The creature looked toward the window. You're breaking the order. What order? Life. The creature smiled again. Death. Then every light in the city went out. All at once. Every building, every street, every traffic light, every apartment, everything became black. For 30 seconds, the entire city was silent. Then the screaming began. Millions of people screamed at once. Ethan looked outside. The streets were filled with ghosts. Thousands of them, then tens of thousands. They stood on rooftops, in intersections, inside buildings, on bridges, coming out of subway stations. Every dead person Ethan had ever seen was there, and they were all looking at him. The black-coated figure stood at the center of the street. Run, it whispered. Ethan didn't. For the first time, he was angry. He had spent months being afraid. Months running. Months watching people die. Months trying to understand something that could never be understood. He looked at the ghosts. Then at the city. Then at the millions of living people who had no idea what was coming. No, Ethan said. The black-coated ghost smiled. Then die. The dead rushed toward him. They came through walls. Through windows. Through the ground. Ethan screamed. Something inside him answered. The air around him changed. Every clock in the city stopped. Every phone screen displayed the same time. 2:17. The sky became completely black. The ghosts froze. Ethan felt something moving through his body. It wasn't pain. It was something colder. Something ancient. Something that had existed before the city. Before humans. Before names. Before time. The ghost began screaming. Ethan raised his hand. And every death time in the city disappeared. For 1 second, nobody knew when they would die. Not even the dead. Then Ethan heard a voice. Not from the ghosts. Not from the sky. From inside his own mind. Everything that lives must end. Ethan closed his eyes. The first explosion came from beneath the city. A subway tunnel erupted. Then another. Fire raced through underground stations. Cars stopped. Buildings shook. Windows shattered. A skyscraper collapsed into the street. People ran in every direction. But there was nowhere to go. The ghosts had surrounded the entire city. Ethan tried to stop it. He tried to lower his hand. He tried to regain control. But he couldn't. The power was no longer listening to him. The city had become a battlefield between the living and the dead. And Ethan stood in the center of it. Every time a ghost attacked him, it disappeared. Every time another ghost touched him, an entire building collapsed. The more he fought, the more the city burned. He watched people running through the streets, families searching for each other, police officers trying to organize evacuations, parents carrying children, people screaming names of loved ones. Ethan wanted to stop, but something inside him whispered, "You wanted to control death." The ground began to split apart. You wanted to decide who lived. Another building collapsed. Now decide. Ethan looked across the city. For a moment, he saw everything. Every person, every soul, every possible future. He saw the entire city as one enormous living organism. Millions of lives connected together. Millions of stories. Millions of endings. And he understood. There was no way to save them. Not all of them. Maybe not any of them. He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Then he closed his hand. The city exploded. A massive wave of fire raced between the buildings. Glass turned into rain. Bridges collapsed. Towers disappeared into clouds of dust. The river boiled. The streets cracked apart. The lights vanished one by one. From miles away, the skyline could be seen burning against the night. Then everything went silent. By sunrise, the city was gone. Where millions of people had lived, there was only smoke, ruins, ash, and silence. Ethan stood alone in the center. He should have been dead. Instead, he was untouched. No burns, no blood, not even a scratch. Round him stood millions of souls. The same ghosts that had tried to kill him. They were no longer attacking. They were kneeling. Every ghost lowered its head. Ethan looked around. What happened? The black-coated figure appeared before him. But this time, it didn't look like Ethan. It looked like something ancient. Something that had been waiting for him. You finally understand. Ethan looked at the dead. What am I? The figure answered. The end. Ethan looked toward the horizon. And suddenly, he could see everything. Every death happening across the world. Every hospital room. Every battlefield. Every lonely apartment. Every accident. Every final breath. Every soul leaving every body. He could see all of it. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Forever. Ethan had spent his entire life believing death was the end. Now he understood that death was only another beginning. And someone had to watch over it. Someone had to collect the dead. Someone had to decide when the final moment had arrived. The ghosts rose. They no longer feared him. They followed him. Ethan turned toward the ruins of the city. There was nothing left. No streets. No buildings. No voices. No people. Only millions of souls waiting for him. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were completely black. And the sky above him filled with stars. One by one, they disappeared. Each one represented a life. Each disappearance was another death. Ethan looked up. Then he smiled. For the first time since the beginning of his nightmare, he wasn't afraid. He understood what he had become. He was no longer Ethan Cole. He was death. The city had been his final battlefield. The dead were his army. And every living soul in the world was now on his clock. Years passed. People eventually returned to the ruins. They built fences around the area. Scientists investigated the destruction. Governments created theories. Some blamed a nuclear accident. Others blamed terrorism. Some claimed the city had been destroyed by an unknown weapon. Nobody ever discovered the truth. But people who traveled near the ruins sometimes reported seeing a man. He always wore a black coat. He stood alone among the remains of the skyscrapers. He never moved. He never seemed to age. And sometimes, people who saw him noticed something strange. A number appeared above their own heads. A date. A time. Their death. Most people ran. But once in a while, someone was brave enough to stay. Someone would walk toward the man and ask, "Who are you?" The man would slowly turn. His eyes were black. Completely black. And he would answer, "My name was Ethan." Then he would look at the number above their head and smile. Now I'm what comes after. So if you ever find yourself walking alone through a city at night, and you notice a man standing beneath a broken streetlight, don't approach him. Don't ask his name. Don't ask why he's watching you. And whatever you do, don't ask him when you're going to die. Because if he tells you, there may be nothing you can do to change it. And somewhere beyond the lights of the city, beyond the noise,